Hi everyone, welcome to the community classroom. This is Dr. Tracey McCarthy, psychologist, attorney, and educator, and we are going to talk about the media as we are winding down, and we are winding down fast. We're going to talk a little bit about the media. This is perhaps a lecture discussion that should have taken place at the front end. However, it wasn't until the back end that it was understood that many people don't understand the media and they don't understand how it works. They don't understand the images, the messages, in terms of what the media does and how the media functions. What we're going to do is we're going to quickly talk about the types of media. We're going to talk about images and messages. This is very important because a number of individuals have manifested very clearly that there is a confusion going on whereby individuals actually think that the media is reality. And we're talking about social media right now. They think that the media is reality, and there's a failure to understand that the media serves as a mediation, meaning it's occupying a middle position. It stands between you and reality. And so when you have a content creator, even me, you have a content creator. That content creator is providing information, providing sources, providing data, providing images, providing messages, but that content creator is in between you and actual reality. The computer is in between you and reality. And so oftentimes people think that they are getting something that is open, direct, and honest, but that might not be what they are getting. And the purpose of media, the underlying purpose of media, is to influence. And so you need to start asking yourself, what type of influence are you under based upon not only the images and the messages, but the messenger? And so the message is important, the image is important, but what is equally important is the person or the thing, the conduit of that image and that message. If this video appears on anything other than Dr. Tracey McCarthy, it is stolen and unauthorized. Let's get started. Let's rock and roll. So what exactly are we talking about when we talk about media? We are talking about the plural of medium, and media is something, it's a means of conveying something. It's a channel or system of communication. You're getting some information, you're getting some sort of entertainment. It's a publication or some sort of broadcast that might carry advertising. It might be a mode of artistic expression or communication, but ultimately a mediation or media is a go-between. It's an intermediary. Now, it's important to recognize that we are surrounded by media day in and day out. Sometimes people think of media as the news, or they think about, film sometimes, but it's even bigger than that. And so when you really start to think about how much media you are exposed to, you understand how big this thing is. And so there are various modes of media. You have visual media, you have oral, it's coming in through your ears, you have tactile media, and sometimes you have combination. So you have combination forms of media. It's coming at you from different directions. And so you can see things, you can hear things, you can feel things, and you'll tend to see media or understand media as film sometimes, but also television, books, radio, print news, print entertainment, music, art, the internet, and even what are known as signs and symbols. And sometimes people experience signs and symbols and they don't understand that there is a communication that is going on. There is a media dynamic that is going on with signs and symbols, even when you don't have someone there communicating the signs and symbols. And remember, media is related to mediation. It means to occupy the middle position or be an intermediary. You can think about mediation in terms of court. So when individuals go through divorces or there's child custody, sometimes there is a mediation and you have a mediator, and that's the person who's in the middle. They sort of play two sides against the middle, and you have the two people on the quote-unquote opposing sides. Now, there are two types of media in terms of, the big picture. You have interpersonal media, and then you have mass media. So what we're dealing with right now is considered mass media. So mass media is a form of communication where it's going from a single point me, to a large number of points. Now, the majority of media that we consume often is mass media because we're seeing signs, we're hearing broadcasts, things like that. But there's also interpersonal media, and that's that point-to-point, person-to-person communication. So when you're talking with your friends, you're talking with your family members, one-on-one types of communication, that is interpersonal media. So many people don't think of that as media, but that is another form of media because you are communicating. There are some images, there are some messages going on, and often the message that you are receiving or the image you're receiving or the symbols and signs, they are a part of a mediated process. So you're not getting the real thing, you're getting something else. And even within mass media, you have two types of mass media. So you have this mass media where you have from a single point to a large number of points, but you also might have communicating from a single source to an audience that includes many people. What's important to remember is even though you hear this message now, you are also hearing music, and that music that you are hearing is also serving as a form of media that is a communication. And so let's quickly look at the transmission model of media. And this is very important because it helps you to understand when you are consuming media exactly what is going on. And one of the problems we have is that in the education systems, starting very early, you do not have a lot of media literacy going on. And so you have children consuming a lot of media and not really knowing what to do with it. They don't know what it means. They don't understand the impact. They don't know how to parse it. And this carries on through high school, college, into the workplace, into families. And so people sometimes don't understand, how media works, how they perform media, how they receive media, and what they do with it. And so you have the transmission model, and this is a transportation model in terms of transportation of a message from one place or person to another. And so you have that source. And remember, we were talking about how important that source is. Where is it coming from? You have a source, then you have the message from the source, and then you have the person, the entity receiving the message. And so when you are watching the evening news, for instance, there's a source. There are multiple sources actually. So you have multiple sources for that. You might have the, the newsmaker, the person who's commenting. You have the producers, you have the directors, you have all of the things that go into getting that message from the newsroom to your room. And so you need to consider those things, like who is sending this message? What is the message that this entity is sending? And how am I to receive it? What am I supposed to do with it? So you can see media comes from a variety of sources. So there are multiple media makers. And so even when you're talking about making an album, a musical album, you have so many people that go into making that album. People usually attribute the media to the person they hear singing or the band they hear performing, but there is a lot more to it than that. And so those who make media include people, and you ask, well, which people? You have organizations and industries that make media, and then you have media institutions, and then you have whole cultures that create media. One instance would be you have Hollywood, Bollywood, and Hollywood, and those are cultures and institutions and people, and there are organizations that put all of that together to broadcast. Now we are doing a very rudimentary overview. There are a few content providers on YouTube and in social media that really do a great job at deconstructing media and media messages, and even the manipulation of media, which would mean people manipulating other people. And so some of those individuals that really get into signs and symbols and things like that, you have Jordan Peterson is actually excellent at that. You also have Days of Noah, and you have Lennon Honor. Those are just a few. Also Chronicles of of Judah. So you have a number of people that really get into this from a variety of angles. And so you can just sort of pick which one seems to fit your vantage point in terms of understanding. And so you have two major components of media. You have the images and then you have the messages. And the images serve to actually convey the messages. And then the messages convey meaning. And so when you are absorbing things online, it's important to understand the images that you are receiving. Sometimes the images are going pretty fast. Sometimes they are, not on a conscious level. So you may not even recognize that you have absorbed an image. And so you sometimes have to pay really careful attention when images are going across the screen. Sometimes there is split-second timing in terms of the presentation of an image. Sometimes there is an oral receipt of a quote-unquote image, so you're hearing something. And so you have to pay very careful attention to what you're hearing, what you're seeing, to get a better idea of the images that are coming in your direction. And sometimes you'll see all sorts of interesting things. It might be placement, it might be color, you might see split screen dynamics, you might see a number of things. And that's all a part of that image that's conveying a message. Even when you look at this screen now, there are images. You see certain colors and it's in lecture format. So you have the images. But the question is, what is the message that is also being conveyed? And sometimes people get lost in the images and they forget about the message. And sometimes they get lost in the message and they forget about the images. And then sometimes people are so swayed by the messenger that they don't even care what the images and the messages are. They will just absorb it simply because of who is bringing the images, who is bringing the messages. And this is when people get manipulated. Now, that manipulation usually comes with an individual having a significant amount of charm and charisma. And so let's look at what we mean by the term images. So when you're talking about images, you're talking about a reproduction or an imitation of the form of a person or a thing. So when you go to a movie and you see, actors on the screen, those are not the actors. Those are reproductions or imitations of the form of the person or the thing. You see an album cover. You see a picture of a person, but it's not the person. It's just a likeness or a semblance of an object of a person. And so it's an illusory form. It's an idea or a concept. It's a popular conception that is projected, particularly through mass media. And so, again, it's a reproduction of a thing. So if you go to a museum and you see a sculpture, that sculpture is not the person, back in antiquity. It's not the person. It's a reproduction. It's an imitation. And so even when individuals are showing you things in terms of content in social media, you're not actually seeing the real thing. So if there's a book, for instance, if I show you pages from a book, that's not really the book. What you are seeing is an imitation, a reproduction. If you want to see the book, you actually have to go to the library or purchase the book, and then you have the real thing. But otherwise, what's really going on in terms of media, whether you're talking about the news, whether you're talking about drama, comedy, a book, 9 times out of 10, what you are getting is a reproduction or an imitation. Even if you're reading a book and it's telling you a story, you're not a part of the story. And so you're getting a story about a story, basically. Now we're going to quickly look at some images, and from these images, one of the things you might want to start doing is thinking about what are these images and what messages are being conveyed by these images. Images do not just occur in a vacuum. There is a message that goes along with the image. And so we're going to go through a few of them, and your task is to simply think about What are these images all about? So if someone shows these images, what is it that they are trying to communicate? Because all images and messages are part of communication. All right, we have another image here. So when you see this image, what do you think is being conveyed by this image? And here we have another image. If you see this image, what do you think this image is all about? What message is being conveyed by someone presenting this type of image? Now, interestingly, this particular image has become highly politicized, very politically charged. When you see these images or this image, what is it that you think this is conveying? And here is an additional image. When you see this image, what do you think is being conveyed by this image? Now, it's important to note that you can see an image and 50 people will see the same image and they will come away with different meanings. And here is another image. When you see this image, what types of messages do you think are being conveyed by this particular image? There's a lot going on in this particular image. And here's yet another image. When you see this image, what do you think is being conveyed by this image? What is being communicated? And here we have another image, and when you see this, what do you think might be the underlying meaning behind this particular image? So if it's presented, what is it conveying? And here's another familiar image. When you see this image, what do you think this image is conveying? And this is yet another image. When you see this or it's presented, what comes to mind in terms of what you think might be communicated with the display of this particular image? And when you see this particular image, what does this image appear to convey in terms of meaning, in terms of message? And here is another image. When you see this, what do you think might be conveyed based upon having this particular image presented? And here we have another image. And when you see this or this image is presented, what do you think might be conveyed based upon the presentation of an image such as this? One of the important things to remember about images is that the images are presented, again, to influence. They are communicating something. And one of the things you need to keep in mind is context. And so you can see each one of those images in a variety of contexts and come away with different meanings. And so context is very important, and context includes, the messenger, what else is surrounding it, what else is going on in terms of the environment. Are there any other images that go along with that image? Is there some sort of speech, verbal speech that's going along with the visual dynamic? And so now let's talk about messages. So we've been asking the question, what does this image convey? What's the message? So what is a message? A message is a communication that occurs either in writing or in speech or by signals. And there's always an underlying theme or an idea to a message that's being conveyed. Now, whether you're talking about interpersonal communication, the one-on-one communication, or whether you're talking about mass media, there is a surface message that manifests message, And then there's also the latent message. And so the surface message is that external, superficial aspect of a message. It's the outward appearance of it. It's overt, it's manifest, you can see it. And that's what many people tend to focus on. And if you've taken time to listen to that song, Candy, you know that they are talking in many ways about those surface messages. And sometimes people don't really want to go deep, and so they stay on the surface. They focus on what they see, not why they see it or why it's even being presented. They don't focus on that. They just focus on what looks like the external, superficial, outward appearance. They are not as concerned with what's going on under the surface of that particular message. And again, that's when people get manipulated, when people are not paying attention to the underlying dynamics related to the messages. And so someone can communicate something. It sounds, okay on the surface. It sounds legit. But if you are not listening closely or looking deeply, you might not understand that there is another message that is going on under the surface. And what's going on under the surface is more important than what's going on the surface. It's the same thing with people. What is more important? What they look like is not as important as what's going on inside of that person. And so it's, you've heard it's not the color of the skin, it's the color of the heart. It's very important to remember that. And what happens is when people get manipulated, they get manipulated because of that superficial dynamic. They get manipulated by what they see and what they hear versus what's going on under that visual and what's going on under that voice. So you really need to think about, where is this coming from? So when you get messages from the news, for instance, where is it coming from? It looks like one thing on the surface, but what's really going on? You'll notice in the news, everything is negative. And so there is very little positive information that comes out of the news. So on the surface, it might just look like, oh, they're just providing information about what's going on in the world. Well, you could provide information about what's going on in the world from a variety of vantage points, but the vantage point in terms of news is often negative. And so the question becomes, why is it negative? What's going on with the negative message? What's going on with the negative images? What is the underlying purpose? Now let's get to the heart of the matter. We've been talking a little bit about propaganda. We talk about political psychology, and a lot of political psychology, a lot of forensic work, a lot of it involves the underlying stuff. And so when you're talking about the underlying message, which is the most important part of the message that's being communicated, you are looking at the message that is only evident upon close inspection, meaning you have to really look at it. So those images that you were looking at, you have to really look at those images and really think about them. What is being presented? What's the context for the presentation? So when you're looking at the underlying message, you're looking at the deeper structure of the message. And the underlying message is understood as the covert or veiled message. And so it's the message that you don't see on the surface. Some people might use terms like it's subliminal, it's unconscious, things like that. But it's that covert veiled message that's under what's on the surface. You see this in music videos very frequently. If you watch music videos, you'll see, like in This Is America, there was so much going on. There was so much going on the surface that might distract you from what's going on underneath. So one of the things with that particular video is not just listening to the music, hearing the beat, looking at all of the stuff that's going on the screen, but actually looking at the deeper structure of the messages related to the images that were being presented. And so there were covert or veiled messages just throughout that entire music video. Now, why is it important to study media from early ages on? So very early, children need to be studying media, and they need to be taught how to deal with media, how to be appropriate media makers, and how to consume media, because media is about power. And so power is about the ability to produce effects, to influence the world, to make a difference in the world. Now, the important thing is this, is that the power, you've heard the power can be used for good or for not so good. So you have the power may make a difference that's either positive or negative. And so it's really important to think about, how is this image being used? How is the underlying message being used? What's really going on? What type of power is taking place? In other words, what type of impact is the image having and the message? What is the impact of those two things? And again, is it positive or is it negative? And you need to really start to think about, when you receive these things, what is the purpose of the image? What's the purpose of the message? What's the surface dynamic that's going on? And what is the underlying message and the influence that you are experiencing? Is it positive or is it negative? Now, again, you can have 10 people experience the same images, think of the same messages in terms of meaning, but they may come away, interestingly, with different effects. So you may have one who is impacted positively and another one who is impacted negatively. Same message, but you have a different impact. Now, it's impossible to analyze every piece of media to which an individual is exposed. It's just impossible. It's not possible to do that. However, the things that you do have control over, you do need to start thinking about what's going on with the images, what's going on with the messages, why are the images being presented the way they are, why are the messages as they are, what is going on, how are you impacted by it? And if you're helping children to understand this, you can kind of talk about this in a variety of ways, and you can walk them through some things with their little cartoons and things like that, because cartoons are laden with all sorts of images and messages, and children may have no idea what to do with all of that. And there's a lot of fantasy going on with cartoons and children's, the programming for children. And so you want to make sure, to the greatest extent possible, that whatever program is going on with your children, that it is what you find appropriate. And again, remember, this is media, so this includes their little coloring books, their textbooks from school, assignments, things they are watching on TV, on the internet, all of that, all of their little games, all of that is a form of communication. It's a part of media. It's a part of that dance of images and messages. And so even when you're having interpersonal communication, you're talking with someone, it's important to understand what's going on the surface, and also what's going on underneath in terms of that communication dynamic. What's going on under there. There's a theory known as the psychoanalytic third from Freud, and basically what it says is that no one has access to the actual truth when you're having this conversation. You're having a one-on-one conversation, and the truth is actually hovering somewhere up above the two people who are communicating, and neither person has access to the total truth of the communication. And you see this when you hear people say there was a miscommunication. Remember, knowledge is power. Take care.